Oh, that's weird. It's failed.
Failed to record?
Hold on. Now it says it's working. Well, maybe this is working.
It's on air.
Welcome to the Hero Report. My name is Ari Cohen. I'm a professor of political science at the University of Nebraska, and with me, as always, Matt Langdon. Matt, we're going to have to work out at some point which one of us is the trusty sidekick. Introduction every week, but we can ask people to write in and give us what they think, which one of us would be the trusty sidekick. And also with us today is Whitney Johnson. Matt, why don't you do a quick introduction for Whitney, and then let's jump into the conversation.
Absolutely. Well, I'll let Whitney introduce herself as to what she's doing and who she is, but I met her on the start of a blogging story or journey at the end of 2006 when I started writing about heroes and started the Hero Construction Company, and she was writing about how heroism was affecting her ideas on empowering women, and we've stayed in touch since. So Whitney, welcome to the show, and tell us a little bit about Dare to Dream and a little bit about your story and how you got to be where you are.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. The story around Dare to Dream specifically, and then we can talk about the hero's journey and how it plays out. In 2005, I took a sabbatical from Wall Street. And at that point in time, I was brimming with enthusiasm and confidence. I had achieved a dream of heading to Wall Street as a music major, and not a lot of confidence, not many connections, and I had been able to become very successful of becoming an institutional investor, all-star ranked analyst, and I thought, okay, well, I've dreamed, so other people can dream as well. But as I started talking to women in particular and asking them, well, what is your dream, and would you like to figure out how to do that dream? Many would say, I actually don't have a dream. Sometimes they would say, I have a dream, but I'm not sure how to do it. And often there was the unspoken, I'm not sure it's my privilege to dream. This really took me aback, in part because these women were very competent, they were capable. Oftentimes they were the women that are running our communities, and people look at them and they're not sure what they're doing all day long, and yet we all know that the communities aren't running quite as well without these particular women. And so I also was really sad. Many of these women were friends of mine, and I just thought, I see this incredible woman, and I want you to see how magnificent I see you as being. And as a consequence, I started blogging. I obviously at that point in time couldn't have written a book. No one would have published me. And so blogging, with its very low barrier to entry, I could just start writing. And so the blog initially was just meant to encourage women in particular to dream. And so that started in late 2006, and about a year and a half in, I started inviting other people to share the stories of their dreams. And so it's been primarily women. Matt, you've been one of the few men that has blogged on my blog at my invitation. But again, it's been a place for people to believe that it's okay to dream, and then also to tell the stories of their dreams.
Fantastic. And so how did you get onto the topic of the hero's journey? Was there a discovery moment there that you saw the Joseph Campbell version and then sort of realized that there was something missing for women?
It's a good question. I remember I had read a lot of Joseph Campbell in the preceding years, and I had actually learned about him, I think, when Bill Moyers was doing the interviews of him probably, 10 or 15 years ago. And I had become quite enthralled with him. And so I'd read a number of his books, The Power of Myth, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, and I was quite taken by all of them. And at some point, I discovered the myth of Psyche, and it's a really good question. I don't remember when. Probably I know, I actually do know. So as I was getting very intrigued by this whole hero's journey that I started reading some books by Robert Johnson, who's a Jungian psychologist. His book called We, I read first, then I read He, I read She, and all of those talked a lot about the hero's journey. In particular, though, Robert Johnson, in his book She, outlined the myth of Psyche. What's interesting as you read his books, and I'm sure it's because he's a man, he was much better at outlining the male journey and male-female journey as he did in We, but in He did a terrific job, but in She came up a little bit short. Then I discovered Jean Shinoda Bolen, and she talked about the myth of Psyche as well. And so it was the consequence of all those thought leaders and influencers that I started to really say, okay, I want to understand the myth of Psyche better. Because what they had said, and certainly it's been in sync with my more layman type of findings, is that there are very few stories that actually chronicle the journey for, the feminine hero's journey. So that's how I discovered it.
So two things, can you just briefly explain the Psyche myth and then lay out the differences in the female hero's journey to the male hero's journey, because it's that was really fascinating to me when I read it and made a lot of sense.
Okay, well, why don't I outline the female hero's journey, and then maybe you can outline the male, and then we can do the point and counterpoint. So the female hero's journey, it's best found in the myth of Psyche, as I mentioned. And the way this journey starts out is Psyche falls in love with Eros. And Eros is the son of, and I'm going to forget her name, Aphrodite, the goddess of love. And Aphrodite decides that she doesn't want her son Eros to be in love with Psyche. She's a human, and so eventually Aphrodite, in an attempt to separate the two from one another, from her beloved basically, she says, okay, you can be reunited with Eros, but you have to complete 4 tasks. And so for Psyche, her hero's journey starts not because she was, off to go on a quest, but her journey starts in order to be able to be reunited with her beloved Eros. And so the 4 tasks that Aphrodite lays out for her are, number 1, she has to sort the seeds, and I'll go into more detail in just a minute. Number 2, she has to gather fleece off the rams in a field. Number 3, she has to fill a flask from a raging river that's alongside a very craggy peak. And then the 4th task is she has to go into the underworld and reclaim a box of ointment. So, and once she completes those 4 tasks, then she'll be able to be reunited with Eros. So in the first task, jumble the seeds. There's this huge mountain of seeds. It's corn, it's barley, etc. And she has to sort those seeds overnight. It's an impossible task. There's no way that she can complete it. But then she has some ants come to her aid. And it's through the help of those ants, this army of ants, that basically helps her sort the seeds, and she's able to end up completing the task overnight. Now, do you want me to go into the symbolism or just talk about the tasks first?
I think the symbolism as you go would be great.
Okay, so the symbolism of this first task is that we have to, as women, in order to grow up psychologically, we have to learn to be able to sift and sort competing priorities. And that's a very, very difficult thing for us to do, because there's so many people, because of our feminine nurturing instinct that we want to care about and attend to, we continually have priorities that we want to say yes to, and they compete. And so this first task is learning to make choices. And what's interesting there is the ants have a couple of different symbolism. Number 1 is they're our intuition. They help us sort and make those, established priorities. And also one could argue that they're partly our masculine self that's helping us learn how to prioritize. And so part of our really growing up is being able to tap into our masculine self as well. So that's the first task. The second task is that she has to go and get this, this fleece off of these head-butting rams in a field. Okay, well, if she's going to go do that, the problem is that if she just walks into the field and tries to grab the fleece off the rams, they'll butt her to death. And so she can't do it that way. So she has to find another way. And again, in complete despair, she realizes, I need help. So this time, it's actually the reeds in the field that say to her, okay, Psyche, here's what you need to do. You need to wait until the very end of the day when the head-butting rams have left the field, and then you can go pick the fleece up off the brambles in the field. She's able to accomplish her task. And this particular task is a metaphor for a woman being able to gain power or be able to get things done without being able to sacrifice her relationships and those that she loves. And so it's there's a saying that I use is that if the fleece that I gather doesn't bind me to those I love, or in other words, if I dream and my dream doesn't draw me closer to those I care about, then it's not a dream I want to dream. And so again, this is learning to gain power without sacrificing our relationships. So that's the second task. The third task is she has to fill a flask from this raging stream that's alongside a craggy cliff. And basically, if she tries to take that flask and dip it into the stream, actually it's not a stream, it's a river, it will carry her away. Again, she's able to delegate. So you notice in each 3 instances she's been able to delegate. She finds an eagle, and the eagle naturally can grab that flask, it can swoop in, fill it, and bring it back to her. And so she's able to complete this task as well. This particular task is a metaphor for her learning how to achieve a goal, notwithstanding some pretty tremendous obstacles. And again, the process of delegating to someone else. Now the fourth task is the most difficult one, and this is where she has to reclaim a box of ointment from the underworld. And this is going to be obviously very difficult, in part because she has to go into the underworld, so into this place of sorrow, but also because as she's heading to this place, she's going to have many people ask her for help. And she is going to have to say no to them, which for a woman who is attending to her feminine side, one of the most difficult things she can ever do is say no. And yet to complete this task, she has to do that. And so this time it's interesting because in this particular task, there is no one she can delegate to. She has to do this entirely on her own. It is her moment. Now, this task, there's a reason this task is the last one. It's the most difficult, and it's the one that requires the most the ability to think in a very both-and way, because what it means is that for a moment, she has to say no to the people that she loves in order to complete the task and say yes to Eros. And so that's the fourth task. So again, just recapping quickly, it's sort the seeds, learn to prioritize, number 1. Number 2, it's gather the fleece, which is learning how to gain power or get things done without sacrificing the relationships with those we love. Number 3 is learning to achieve a goal. Again, she can delegate. And number 4 is learning to say no. And to paraphrase Oprah Winfrey and also Warren Buffett, you can't ever really say no, or you can't ever really say yes until you learn to say no. And so this is the feminine hero's journey, these tasks that are very specific to women. And you'll notice that they're all teaching us not how to nurture, because we already know how to do that. They're teaching us, well, instinctively, or if you believe in gender differences, they're teaching you you already know how to do that. But what they're doing is they're teaching us to pull in the masculine piece of ourself according to Jungian psychology, and then we become a complete person, which is ultimately the whole point of a hero's journey for a man or a woman, is to become a complete person.
Right. And I think you did a pretty good job of explaining the differences already with the male and female. I mean, the male, what struck me, I think, was that the male hero's journey is all about leaving home, overcoming challenges and learning and coming back as a different person, where it seems the female journey has a lot to do with being at home and improving yourself at home and your role at home. Does that make sense?
Well, I'm not sure that I actually agree entirely. I think, you know, there's another great metaphor of, you know, the ship in the harbor, and I think that if we think about where we start life, I think most boys are taught to and learn how to go out and be the ship, to navigate the waters, and we as a society really help our boys and our men learn how to do that. I think we're not doing that as well right now, and I think that's why some of our boys are at risk of their growth being stunted, because we're not requiring them to go out and be a ship. And I think for women, we are taught and socialized to learn to be a harbor, the safe harbor where people can come home to. So for me, so we do those two different pieces instinctively. To me, the journey is for the man to not only know how to be the ship, but to come home and be the harbor. And you see that with men that are older, you know, that get to be 60 and 70. If they're really this mature, wonderful man, they're very patriarchal and kind and gentle and wise. And to me, that's the male hero's journey, who's gone out and he's slayed the dragon, and now he's gentle and kind. And for women, it's the opposite. She starts out attending to others' needs as the harbor, but then her part of growing up is going out and learning how to be the ship. But as she learns how to be the ship, she again becomes a better harbor.
Right. I like that. I like that a lot.
Thanks.
So Ari's has written a lot about heroism in myth, so I'm curious to hear his thoughts on that too.
One of the things that struck me, you know, in listening to this discussion so far is really the centrality of working with others in the Psyche story. You know, I've spent a lot of time writing about Achilles and Odysseus, and there's just no working with others, right? I mean, by and large, those stories are about the singularity of those men, right, and how because they are in some sense, these forces unto themselves will accomplish these really impressive things. So I see that as one of these really interesting differences that stands out. But it's also the case in both of those stories, in the Iliad and the Odyssey, that they wouldn't be able to do any of the things that they do if women didn't play the role in those stories that they do, right? So Odysseus doesn't get anywhere if he doesn't have the assistance or the inspiration of women throughout the story.
Yep.
Even though ultimately he's the one who has to go and do the things. And then of course there's, I mean, the Iliad, the role of Achilles' mother, for example, is critically important in outfitting him to go and do any of the things that he does.
Right.
But obviously, I mean, the central issue in those stories is about these men doing great deeds.
Right.
And the women are, in some sense, these ancillary characters. If you spend a lot of time thinking about it, then you think about the role played by the women. But if you read it once through, you likely don't.
Right. Right, and what's interesting there is that I would almost argue that these journeys, actually, you've got me thinking, but these journeys that the men are going on, it's sort of the early part of their life, and they're very important journeys. Now the question is what would happen if there were the other side of the story, and you could also wonder, in the case of their mother and their sisters and even their wives, were they, in the symbolic way, supposed to pull those characteristics into them so that by the time they died, they'd also had the feminine characteristics as well? I mean, we don't know because those parts of the myths weren't written, but it is a question.
Well, maybe, I mean, in that sense, Achilles is really fascinating, right? because of all of the heroes that go to Troy, Achilles is both the greatest warrior, but we also learn that he's a healer, right? So he has that aspect to his character as well. And of course, the story of Achilles going to Troy is really interesting in and of itself in this respect, because Achilles is the only one who's not obligated to be there, right? Because he wasn't involved in the suit of Helen, and so he contracted around. And in fact, his mother has hidden him away, right? So he won't go. And she has, of course, dressed him up as a girl. And when they come looking for him, it's only his nature as a great warrior that comes out, and he can't stay hidden in the way that his mother hopes that he would, so that he would go and fight. But he does have, in some sense, this side to his personality, even though he's the youngest and the most accomplished in battle and so on. He has, I think, what people would suggest is this sort of caring role as well, and that plays out, I think, most importantly at the very end of the Iliad, where I think he really accomplishes something, not just killing people, but reconciling in some sense with his enemy, which is a thing that.
Yeah, it sounds like. So have you? So I had never thought about the story from this perspective, but it sounds like you could definitely argue that Achilles is one of he's one of these great stories and myths where you can show that he has the masculine developed, and in a Jungian sense, he has developed his feminine characteristics as well, and that's part of what makes him such a great hero. And is that how you've written about it, or but you're a political science, so you're probably not sort of arguing it that way?
Well, I haven't actually talked about it this way. I mean, I talk about sort of the importance of the reconciliation at the end to his reintegration into the moral community, without which he couldn't be heroic, because he stands apart throughout most of the Iliad, and has to come back to the group. But I haven't thought about it in terms of sort of a male-female dynamic or gender roles or anything like that.
I don't know. What do you think, Matt? Do you think it works?
Yeah, I do, and I absolutely haven't got the familiarity that you two have with the stories, but I liked what you said, Whitney, about that the hero's journeys are really a lot of the time focusing on the beginning of the men's lives, and I think that's was always a big role that the stories played, is helping with the rite of passage, becoming a man from being a boy, and I think that links into something you said earlier too about the lack of good men or complete men in today's society, that those rites of passage are missing, that boys aren't being pushed out of the home or forced to leave to go on journeys. I think that's really interesting in of itself. So have you got any other examples of stories that fit that psyche model?
There aren't a lot.
Right.
There really aren't. It's in fact, I was thinking as you were talking about this, it would be really interesting and probably quite fun to take this story of Achilles and put it alongside the story of Psyche and just see the development for each, but sort of the mirror image. I think it could be quite interesting, because I love that whole idea of Achilles and sort of the wound, and that there's that vulnerability, and it makes you've got my interest piqued, I have to say. I find myself wanting to study about him in a way that I never had.
Well, my work here is done.
So the short answer is no, Matt.
I want to take that, Matt. I want to take that as an opportunity to sort of talk about something that you and I brought up several weeks ago here on the show, and throw this out to Whitney, because I think this is something that we've really been trying to think about. I mean, there is this, what seems to us anyway, to be something lacking, in terms of female heroes, in a way that, I mean, for boys, there are, I mean, the range of options is just is huge. You couldn't help finding a hero with to identify in literature and film and in if you're a boy, and I think it's much more challenging to find really compelling female heroes. And I wonder if that's just my perception as someone who hasn't really spent a lot of time looking, or if that is in fact the case, and then how problematic is that, that we have so few female heroes that stand out.
I think it is the case. Let me give you an example of something. Did you ever see the film The Devil Wears Prada with
Yes.
Meryl Streep and Hathaway? I think that actually captures this this double bind that women and girls frequently find themselves in, because for women, it's frequently you can have your career, or you can have this goal or sort of achieve something for yourself, or you can get the guy. You notice that, as soon as she thought about going off and doing something spectacular with her career, it meant she gave up her boyfriend. And it was only when she renounced the career then she could have the guy. And you see that play out over and over and over again for women. And so it does put us very much in a double bind. And I think that's one of the things that women are really trying to navigate, and why you constantly hear us talking about this stuff is because we're trying to figure it out, and there are very few role models, and especially for women where, once you start getting over 50, you start to think, well, now my value is gone because if I can't trade on my looks anymore. So there's this very difficult place that women find themselves in that we are continually trying to figure out. I do think that the Hunger Games, and kind of coming back to that film that you wanted to talk about, this one is a tough one a little bit because so much of the story revolves around her choosing between Peeta and Gale. And I think that, if you think about her from a metaphorical standpoint, in many ways Gale was her masculine that she was trying to pull in. But Peeta was really the man or the boy that was the better match for her in terms of being married to. But because so much of the story focuses on a love triangle, we sometimes forget that really the hero's journey started, as Matt and I discussed, when she agreed to be the Christ figure and stand in for her sister that she didn't want to, who was, assured of death. She said, I will not let my sister die. It will kill her, it will kill my mother, and I'm going to stand in for her. And that was her heroic moment. The rest of it, it's interesting, it's compelling, it makes you so that you read the book overnight like I did, but that's not the hero's journey piece, really.
I think that's interesting because when I read the book, the first one in particular, I felt that she was rejecting the love triangle, that it was an annoyance almost, and maybe in comparison to a life or death struggle in the Hunger Games, it was irrelevant. But she seemed to spend a lot of time thinking, I just don't want to think about this right now, and there was certainly some confusion there as well over her feelings and understanding the boys' feelings. But I'm interested in how you think her journey matched onto the Psyche female journey, because it seems, without having done too much analysis of it, that it's really an effort to put a girl into a boy's story and attract girls and boys to the story. What do you think about that?
Okay, well, first of all, I haven't thought about it, so I'm about to riff.
Yep.
So the first piece I would say is she goes on the journey for someone that she loves. I think you could argue that boys do that as well, but I think certainly that the reason why she embarks on the journey is consistent with the piece of psyche.
Sure.
I think that the other, I don't know that I agree with you. I mean, just thinking about it very simply, I mean, she doesn't sacrifice her basic feminine humanity never gets sacrificed throughout the entire journey, but she is learning how to do some of these more masculine things that she, hunting, and obviously that's very outwardly masculine. But
yeah, I think you're right, because I mean, one of the foci of the first story is her nurturing of the girl whose name I'm completely forgetting. That was an important part of her story. It was a focal part of her story, was that she was not actively going out to kill everyone else.
No.
She was aiming to survive, and she was actively helping others to survive as well, despite the the catch-22 there, that everyone that you help survive is increasing
Right.
your chance of not surviving.
Right. Again, I think it was actually really consistent, and so the part where I would say I got tripped up is the fact that, in the end, because Gail is sort of that more wild, masculine person, I found myself, because I'm steeped in Western culture, wanting her to be with Gail. But if I'm really looking at this from the standpoint of a true hero's journey and pulling in your masculine side and being a complete person, it did play out as you would hope it would from a hero's journey standpoint.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I wonder if it was calculated. That the author I know has a screenwriting background, so the impression is that she was probably writing to be a movie anyway. But I wonder if it was deliberate to make her a hunter and to get some of that, because it's this sort of ultimate goal for Hollywood, is to find a female hero to build a movie around that will attract more than just women. And
yeah, I don't think
that.
I don't think it is an ultimate goal of Hollywood. I think it's one of those things that we kind of talk about how it's the Holy Grail, but I don't think we set out to do it. I think it just happens that this woman wrote this story and she wanted to write a really compelling story, and this is what she came up with.
Yeah.
But the fact that it's done well means that there will be more of them.
Right.
And I think that's really positive.
Right.
Yeah.
How does it compare? Go on, Ari.
Well, I was just going to say, responding to one of the comments of someone who's watching our broadcast right now, I mean, this really is critical because, for parents who have daughters, for example, not having these female heroes is a real lack. There's really something missing there. And simply having an attempt where a female character tries to fit into the male heroic story, we know that's a miss, right? That doesn't it doesn't translate. So if you're right that this is someone who's attempting to simply tell a really compelling tale about a strong female character, and if that's true, all of this is certainly going to drive more of it, which can only be good.
Well, and I'm fortunate in the sense that I'm living this real time. I have an 11-year-old daughter who went to see this film, and she came home, and so she's in this interesting place because she's old enough that she's supposed to be, growing up, and doesn't really want to be growing up yet. She has an older brother who, partly to tease her, but partly because he actually really means it, tells her she's beautiful, and yet she hates that. And she will say things like, I want to be invisible so that I will be acknowledged. And then, so to give you, that's as a backdrop. She goes to see the Hunger Games. She comes home. She wears her hair in a Katniss Everdeen braid for 3 days.
And there's a big point that in the media about, and there's a big point in the media about choosing an actress who wasn't glamorous looking too, and that's an important part of it. And I think they made a I don't know if they made a brave decision, but they certainly could have had someone who was this typical Hollywood teenage glamorous actress.
She's a pretty girl, but I agree.
Right, right, yeah. Right. So how does this? I know you were probably, I think, you were the person who exposed me to the Twilight series many years ago, and you were a big fan. And
Ari's covering his face.
I've full disclosure, I've never read the books, and I tried to watch the first movie and didn't make it through. But
I love watching Ari's face.
Right. I've read I've read commentary on the stories, and I wonder, how does her story fit in to this? Because from what I understand, she was very passive as a main character. So is there, how does that fit into the hero's journey?
That's a great question. I would say, so let me first of all caveat everything I'm about to say by saying, Ari, for you, that I read all 4 of these books, each one within a couple of days. I found them intoxicating, and I found them revolting all at once. It was a real love-hate relationship with them. What I would say, so some people will push back at me on this, but here's the reason it was intoxicating is it played into our whole Western notion of love, of damsel in distress, and then this perfect chivalrous superpower comes and rescues you. As a woman, that just plays into every sort of latent imagination or princess fairy tale, everything that we have. The problem with it as a woman who's trying to grow up is that she never really grew up, and you could argue, some would argue, that she grows up eventually, but she has to become a vampire to do that. She has to basically go to her dark side in order to grow up, and so that's not really the kind of growing up that we want us to do. It's kind of like in Grease where she, Sandy becomes who she becomes. I can't remember who she becomes, but anyway, so I understood as I was watching and reading those books that I was intoxicated, and I understood what was going on, and I wanted to read them, but I also knew that for my own sort of sense of well-being and sense of empowerment as a woman who makes choices and owns her choices and acts and isn't acted upon, this was not a book that helped me move that forward. So it's not a hero's journey.
Got it. That's good to hear. I was honestly curious about that. I saw and got the impression that it wasn't.
It's not.
Okay, so then what do we say about all of the young women and girls who were totally captivated by those books and films and continue to be, and I mean the whole sort of Twilight phenomenon that struck? What do we say about that in that?
Well, I guess what we say is, depending on who you are, you're going to have women like me who claim to be self-aware. We'll still read them anyway. But I think what it's telling us is that there's a lot of women who we just don't want to quite grow up. We don't really want to go on the feminine hero's journey. We want to stay the princess our whole life and never grow up and be the queen. The queen who has to make hard decisions, the queen who has to make choices, the queen who has to wield power wisely and well. We want to still be the princess of being 14 years old. And that means that we just get what we want and what we need, but it's not what our life is.
Well, I think the same thing's true for men as well, right? People don't want to go on the hero's journey, and that's a key piece of the hero's journey, is that refusal of the call.
Yep.
Many men are not interested in going through that challenge, that torture almost, to change into something better. And like you said, that they come back into the harbor as a much better person for the general populace. And again, that's that the opportunities for men are really lacking a lot in today's society, as well as lacking for women.
Well, you know, Matt, you just said something that prompted a thought, and so I'll throw it out for your consideration. I think, so if you're, as a woman, if we go through life still wanting to be the princess, I think that's part of where the midlife depression and anger starts to come into place, because maybe we've wanted to grow up, but we haven't had the opportunity because of how we married, etc. But I think that it's that midlife, if we don't start responding to that and pulling in some of our masculine pieces, we get either really depressed or really angry, or start being very unkind to our daughters because we're seeing them have the opportunities that we wish we were having. So it plays out in all sorts of quite nasty ways, if you will, if we continue to try to be a princess when we're 40 and 45 and 50.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you see the same thing with the male midlife crisis, that we want to be 20 years old driving a sports car.
Right.
Absolutely. And I think that you mentioned about being a lot of people being trapped into a marriage that's not letting them grow, I think is really important too, and you see that all the time.
Right.
But again, it takes a lot of strength to leave that old world, that mundane world, and set off into parts unknown for both, right?
Right, and especially if you stay married and you leave that mundane world. In other words, when you do the tough job of staying in the marriage and doing the hard inner work, as opposed to assuming that it's an outer problem and leaving sort of the outer piece, and it's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah, very much, very much. So Whitney, we've got people watching and they're leaving comments for us on Google+, and someone's just asked a question, I think directed to you.
Okay, please.
I don't think it's a tough one, but how do you feel about the politically correct trend of removing the masculine and feminine labels on roles in our lives? And I'm assuming we're talking about actors and actresses, or that sort of thing.
Oh, you mean to say actor? I don't have a problem with it. I think, although, I mean, if someone wants to say I'm your waiter versus, you know, I'm your waiter, and I think that's fine. And I understand kind of the chairwoman, chairman kind of thing. The difficulty becomes when we can take it too far, and when we start to allow